development. And I'm responsible for the HTML5 responsive web design and other components that make up our new HTML5 mobile syllabus area. So what I'm going to talk to you about today is a little bit about responsive website development. To set up the agenda, we're going to set out why being mobile ready matters and what solutions we have available for us. We're then going to explore the building blocks of responsive website design, RWD. So we're going to look at how things like media queries and the minimum feature requirements we need to create a responsive website. And then I'm going to show you Zerb's Foundation CSS Framework, which is one of a number of CSS frameworks out there, but the Foundation one is very modular and a very effective way of getting you into this responsive web design journey. And helping you along the way as you take control of quite a complex and challenging space. So just some housekeeping first. As Sam has said, the session is going to be recorded, available for later viewing. If you have got any events or comments afterward, you can contact us on techweek@qa.com. You can ask questions into the question window during the session. As we take a couple of breaks during the session and towards the end, I'll try to open up for questions. If it is about the a technical comment, please feel free to email me after the course as well. And my email address is also here on the slide. I'll repeat my email addresses and these email addresses at the end of the session. So why do we need to worry about responsive? Let's set that out to begin with. This is just the last couple of years of mobile growth in terms of some statistics. What is clear at the moment is the advent of mobile-based devices is superseding desktop and standard computing. We are getting to a generation where IT consumers are able to conduct the entirety of their internet life via a tablet or a phone. To put this in context, out of the UK's e-commerce for Christmas last year, about 20% of sales were actually done on a mobile computing device. And as a result of that, I think we're getting to the position where a mobile device is no longer a nice to have, it's a must have. Some of you may already be on 4G phones. 4G connectivity for the early adopters is faster than most of our broadband connections, unless we're lucky enough to be on something like a BT Infinity line. So the data and the amount of usage for mobile data is growing. There's important concepts of that in terms of mobile data use as well, because actually what we need to ensure that when we're building responsive websites, we are good curators of our users' mobile data. Many of us will be on mobile contracts which have a cap on data. So throwing down huge pictures or videos which are part of a desktop desktop website experience is an incorrect approach of when we actually start moving forward towards mobile and responsive. I'm a key believer when we're going for responsive. Actually, what we're trying to do is to minimize the amount of data we're actually doing. Some quite cool techniques for doing this, which will be on the scope of this session, but I'll give you some opportunities to learn more about those towards the end of the session. To put this in context, I think we're now at a position where it is no longer a nice to have a mobile website. Every organization needs to be considering how and when they will be making their website mobile ready. To put this in context and some stats around this. 72% of mobile users say it's important for them that their websites are mobile friendly. If you think about this, I'm sure almost all of us over the last couple of weeks have probably hit a website that is not mobile ready. Okay, 96% of us will have visited a site that doesn't work well on a mobile device, whether that's a phone or a tablet. As a result of that, the pinch and zoom days are gone. Users are no longer willing to put up with that if they're trying to do complex interactions. And users are 5 times more likely to abandon a task if they don't and optimize the user experience for them. And there's trends for this which are quite important. Etsy, which is a craft-based sort of eBay-type site for handmade and vintage products, that redesigned its user flow recently, and it took out a couple of steps. It made its mobile experience better, and as a result of that, it is now moved into a position where it is making about 20% more completed transactions by going down that route. A mobile-ready experience is becoming a consumer must-have. So how do we get to mobile development? I'm going to focus on the bottom one of these very shortly, responsive web design, but it's not the only way to get there. There are different ways of reaching a user market. You sometimes need one, you sometimes need a blend of the two. A lot of organizations go into the investment of actually building an app, And the apps you see, some are brilliant, but a lot of them are just glorified RSS feeds. They're actually a way of scalping data off your main website and presenting it into an app-type experience. That's not to say you shouldn't have an app, and I'll talk about the pros and cons of that in a moment, but it does have a far higher internal cost for an organization to build and develop. We're going to focus on HTML5 and CSS3 and a little bit of JavaScript to look at responsive. The other options are to use something like an embedded HTML5 application using platforms like PhoneGap, or to filter at the server, which some organizations have been doing for quite a while in the way they actually build and manage their websites. Let's talk about the different approaches and the different pros and cons and advantages. Going native is building an app, and there are key reasons that you might want to build an app. Apps are faster, they're more responsive. You're running on the operating system, but you are actually building a mini program. The organizations in going down the app route is you have to build using iOS, and that often means an Objective-C theme for dealing with Apple programs. If you're going for Android, you need to have a Java team running. If you're going for a Windows Phone, you've got to have a .NET team running. And that becomes quite a cost for a lot of organizations. There's a lot of similarities, but the devices are quite different in terms of what you can and can't do with them. Android in particular is a very complicated platform to work for because there are so many variants of what is an Android device. The big advantage of building for native is it is going to be more performant, and you can do things which are not sandboxed, which are more available to you if you're using a native app type program, which include interacting with many more of the sensors and the capabilities of the device. But having multiple teams is actually an expensive solution, and all organizations can't afford or justify multiple teams to work on this. Embedded HTML takes HTML5, CSS3, JavaScript, and it's going to use a framework that we're going to talk about for responsive, but actually uses a tool like PhoneGap as a platform for wrapping up a HTML5 application. It's worth noting that Windows 8 Metro application, the entire platform for the Firefox mobile OS, this is how you would build applications for it. You have an option to build using those native technologies. Now, most organizations do tend to have a JavaScript, HTML, CSS skill set within organizations. And the temptation is there to use these skills in embedded or the mobile-ready website so you can reduce the amount of separate workflows you've got going on. This is an embedded app. It is going through a proxy layer to get to the actual hardware, and it will not be as fast as a real-time application. Where organizations have come into mobile earlier, and the BBC is a fantastic example of this, you can filter at the server. You have M-dot variants of your website. Within the responsive community, you get a lot of people complaining about M-dot sites, and we should be getting rid of them. Yes, in the long term, we should do. But the mobile filtering at server solution allows us to create a bespoke mobile version of a website and a desktop example of this. I'm just going to share out my desktop at this point. And I'm going to bring up a little tool that I've got plugged in. You can just get this from the Google App Store. If this is going to work for me.
May I just say, David, as well, just so for those, if we all scroll to the top of our screens just now and open up our chat window and our participant panel, then we'll have the chat window back in action. Thanks, David.
Brilliant, thank you. Oh, I'm having some problems here, folks. Give me a few moments.
Hello, all. Just to let you know, there is no audio or visual just at the moment, so please don't worry. We're just starting something up for you. We'll be back online in just a couple of minutes. Thank you. Hello, all. Just to let you know, we've got no audio just at the moment. We'll be back up in just a moment. I'm just speaking with David just now. Stay with us just a second. Thank you. I think I have David back online now. David, over to you.
Okay, sorry about that, folks. We just had a little bit of a problem there. So let's try that again. I'm just going to try and share out my desktop in a moment. There we go. Right. So let's try that again. Okay, let's just share myself back out to my desktop now. There we go. Great. Now, hopefully everyone's going to be able to see me here. What I wanted to show a few moments ago, before I had my Chrome crash out, was that I've got a little plugin for Chrome, and what this allows me to do, and you can get this just off the Chrome store. This is just a plugin for. That's what I want to do. BBC website. This allows me to show you what a website will look like in a responsive structure. So I'm going to come to this website, and I'm going to show out in the responsive mobile viewer. And we've got some of the most common devices you might want in there. So I'm going to look at the website on an iPhone 4, and you can see what's actually happened there is this is filtering at the server. Now, what's actually happened is that's gone to the m.bbc.co.uk website, and it has filtered at the server. If you try and look at the client side, it will always show you from your desktop a desktop version of the browser. That approach is actually, though, a technique which the feeling is it's on its way out. And what we should be aiming to do in contemporary development is actually build a responsive website. Responsive websites leverage HTML5 and CSS3 to get their job done. And they involve the use of something called media queries, which I'll talk about more very shortly. You give the client the ability to decide how it's going to display and the logic that comes with it to reposition, reform, depending upon a user's screen resolution, if they resize their browser, if they switch the orientation of the device. So everything sits into the client. This means that the entry level responsive design is is relatively high. We are talking Internet Explorer 9 in terms of desktop applications, and all of the other major desktop applications for some time. But actually, most mobile devices that we could count on today would actually have the ability to deal with responsive website design. They've been built with the idea of HTML5 from the bottom up in terms of they actually work. So, the downside to responsive design is that effectively you are having to build in potentially more content to get the responsive solution to work. The worst types of responsive designs where they have an image which is suitable maybe for a large scale screen or a retina type iPad display, and they kind of squeeze that onto a tiny phone, or they hide content everywhere, large amounts of content, when the user is actually looking at selective or small parts of the data or the page at a single point. And that's one of the mastery points of actually good responsive design, is learning how to filter out unnecessary information. If we're talking about a responsive website, at the beginning, there are three core things we're looking to do. We're looking to create a liquid or a fluid layout. Now, in the last generation of website development, websites tended to be built very pixel perfect. An art director may have created a Photoshop design that you then mocked up and created a set of website pages. You might have been absolute positioning, you might have locked that page down so it doesn't go anywhere. That is not suitable for mobile-based development. All that will do is, a user on a mobile viewport has to pinch and zoom around the screen to see a particular part of it. So we're going to have to create a liquid or fluid layout. We're going to have to think about how and what our pages are going to do in terms of the flow of information. We need to create media queries, which I'll show you in a moment. Media queries are an extension of a CSS technology, and they allow us to create widths, heights, minimums, maximums, orientation settings, the pixel density ratio of a screen that allows us to understand what should be displayed when, selectively loading content upon what the user is going to do. And we should look at fluid images. There are lots of techniques for doing this. I'm going to show you a couple during my demonstrations in the technical part of this session very shortly. One of the things we want to try and maximize and achieve well in responsive website development is we want to be in a situation where the image that is correctly loaded for the type of device that the user is currently seeing. One of the worst things we can do is have a very large graphic which squeezes it into a small screen, because that's a lot of wasted data for a mobile user. So, as I said, we're going to use HTML5 and CSS3 to achieve this. I'm going to use some HTML5 tags if people are not familiar with them. I will point them out as we get to them. HTML5 and CSS3, this is a very important year for HTML5 and CSS3. With Windows XP finally going out of support, out of production, we are getting to the point where the majority of browsers, the vast majority of browsers, are now HTML5 compliant. HTML5 is still a work in progress, but quite a lot of it now is actually moving forward to propose and candidate recommendations. Media queries, which make up, there we go, media types, which make up part of the CSS2 specification. The media queries there in CSS3. These are, again, works and modules in process. We're getting to the position where most browsers will now support them. If you are going to go with responsive design, you do have to consider how you're going to support legacy browsers, if you're going to support legacy browsers. A lot of organizations are now deciding that IE6 and IE7 will get a very core basic level of functionality, but actually trying to put all the polyfills in, all the fallbacks to make sure all the browsers work is becoming a cost which is too great to bear, actually, in terms of very shrinking user base. So, responsive web design starts using media queries. Media queries are the ability to create CSS blocks. If you use an @ sign to create the media query block, almost like you're creating a little functional block of code. And within there, that CSS information will only launch when particular criteria are met. If you've not dealt with responsive design before, you may have come across the concept of print-based style sheets, for instance, which prior to responsive design is where this would have most commonly been seen. A style sheet for a specific media type. Media queries now allow us to have these AND statements to specifically say when it's the width of the screen is maybe 600 pixels, 800 pixels. If the image density is 2 for a retina type display, we can select to control those environments. Okay, so they extend out to the idea of CSS2. And here we can see an example of some media query code. What I've got here is you've got the app media, all, you can say screen, all, print, depending what's actually going to be happening here, and the criteria that's important. So the viewport of the browser here, if that's 640 pixels or less, the following ID class will apply. If it's between 600 and 900 pixels, the class below will apply. This allows us to block out and segment the sections of our code into discrete chunks. So I'm just going to open up some code samples for us to have a look at a moment. So I can demonstrate this working, and you can see how your browsers can help you to deal with this. Now, it's worth noting that most browsers today are in a situation where we've got some quite powerful client-side tools to help us with debugging. So if people just give me a few moments, I had a little crash that I'm just resolving. Right, I do apologize, sorry for because I had a crash of my system when we started this up, and it's fixed. Causing me a few problems. I'll be with you as quickly as I can.
Hi everybody, just to reiterate, we'll be back online in just a couple of minutes. Hello everyone, just to say again, we apologise for this, we're going to be getting going in just a moment. David, do you have an update for us?
Yeah, I'll be with you as quickly as I can. Sorry, my machine is misbehaving. I don't want to drop back out again.
Okay.
If you just give me a few minutes, I'll be with you. So what I have here is a relatively straightforward bit of HTML. There's nothing too complicated happening. There are some articles They're inside a little wrapper, but what I've got is I've got some classes which will conditionally apply. So the aim being that when my browser width is 600 pixels or less, it's going to set the background color and change it to 900 pixels. If it's between 600 and 900 pixels, again, we're going to get a different media type. So if I view this out into my browser at the moment, what I'm also going to do is bring my developer tools inside Chrome. You can do that just pressing F12 inside Chrome, and it will give us some help to understand what is actually happening with the individual parts of our page. So I'm going to inspect the element there for the wrapper, and what we should see is there's a little media here saying that the media is currently within 900 pixels, so it's setting the background to be orange in the terms of the color. If I resize my page, you can see now I've gone between 600 and 900 pixels, so this other conditional class is applying. If I go lower than 900, the orange disappears. If I hit smaller than 600, you can see that the areas turn pink. This is all happening in the client. I've got no need to go back to the server for this. So the media query is separating out the individual chunks of logic and the styles and classes I want to build. This does have a complication in terms of planning and thinking about good responsive websites, because actually you tend to have a lot of different parts of a page that you actually have to build up. These concepts are referred to as breakpoints. Okay, breakpoints are the different devices, the different screen widths that you need to target. It used to be easy. We used to have the sort of iPhone size, and then a tablet size, and then a desktop size. But the plethora of devices that are out there today are actually quite challenging in terms of how we actually work. Even in the little page that I've just built up at the moment. So again, I'm going to come back out and share my desktop at this point. What I've got again here to show us this, I've got a little tool again. It's a little plugin you can get from Chrome called the Responsive Inspector. You can use it on any page, and it will tell you different media queries on the page, and it will help you resize the browser to those different media query types. So my little simple page here has only got 3 media queries attached to it. But if I go to something like Time is a very interesting website. .com is a news website. They have gone responsive. I'll bring up the responsive inspector here. You can see they've got media queries, an incredible number of different media queries based upon the devices and the proportions that we actually need to deal with. Each breakpoint that we're actually working with gives us the framework to show and reformulate the page based upon a user's requirement. So in this environment, to show you how this can actually work, I'm going to show us a very simple page using let's go and show this. I'm going to show you a very simple page using responsive website design technologies and creating some breakpoints. So what I've got here, quite a few things going on in the CSS of this page. But this is a page which is mobile ready. And you can see what's happening. As I reflow my page, it is rebuilding, restructuring based upon the proportions of the device. If I go back to my little inspector for the responsive inspector, it is telling me that we have a 480, 768, 1140 pixel. So what I sort of created for this was the idea of a desktop page, a small tablet, sorry, try that again, a mobile page, a small tablet, and a desktop device in terms of the proportions. As you can see as I'm doing it, what's happening, if I come back down here, I'm not losing any content, but what's actually happening as I do this is the content is reflowing and shifting on the page. This is the aside that is sitting to the right of my page when I've got the document rolling. I come back and look at my media queries with this and have a look at the CSS attached to it. What I'm actually doing here is this is a simple sort of 2-column structure. But at the smaller mobile ready website, what's actually happening as we hit the first breakpoint and it's above 480 pixels, I'm reflowing the position in terms of the CSS. So the aside suddenly isn't taking up 100% of the width. It's not immediately appearing underneath. It's now actually trying to move itself across the page based upon the criteria that we're actually building in. And I'm rebuilding my columns, my classes, so they take up a certain amount of the screen that I've got available as I hit this individual classes. Even to the point where here I've got a CSS3 functionality, which is making my text multi-column. What you'll notice when I hit the smaller page, that multi-column is gone. It really wouldn't work on a mobile device having multi-column text with a single column display. But actually, by only having the class and the logic for that class appearing in the tablet or the desktop breakpoints, as you see I got up to 2 to 3 classes, I can reflow the information, thinking about the experience and the way I want that user information to appear. So, breakpoints allow us to create a simple page. Just to put this in context, that example I was just showing you for that very simple page, that was about 260 lines of CSS. CSS is really verbose and actually time-consuming to get quite a lot of work done. So we are going to look at instead how we can optimize the way that we speed up the way we do responsive design. Most good responsive websites today are built on a concept of a grid. So let's introduce the grid next. Grids are not new. They've been around in concept since around the 1930s. And one of the big advantages of grids is the ability to proportionally set out and space elements from each other. That allows us to create a much more uniform layout in the way that text and information sits. Spacing objects equally from each other based upon some sort of built-in consideration. Some of you may have heard things like the golden ratio, which is a design of sort of, as you go down, the space between objects continually mathematically shrinks, but actually is proportionally very effective to the way that we read and present an object being effective and beautiful. So grids allow us to take an area of a page and break down the document into smaller units. Grids aren't necessarily new. 960 is a grid which has been used in desktop design for a number of years, but that was for fixed pixel type layout. The benefits of the grid are usability, aesthetic appeal, and efficiency. Again, the speed of lining up items, because you will be cutting a page into repeating constant sizes, it means that you can actually build up a document really quickly, effectively, efficiently, space-wise. That information can be locked out for us, and it's going to look quite quickly an efficient and effective way of building on the web. But as I've shown you, actually building even a simple 2-3 column gridding system like I did there is a number of lines of CSS. It's a substantial amount of work for organizations to invest in. And I'm a big believer that when people first hit responsive website development, what they probably want to look at is some of the CSS frameworks that are out there to assist us in the way that we build pages. Now for CSS today, there are a number of different frameworks. Foundation is one that I'm going to focus on very shortly. But these are all built on a responsive grid system. And the grid system has sort of the idea of the media query. We determine a maximum width for the screen. And then we break down that space into a number of smaller chunks that we can reuse for the page. Using these tools, we can quickly put together the idea of the grid. They usually have quite advanced features in there, like maybe responsive image generators, form validators, navigation controls for building responsive frameworks as well. And there are a few out there. 960 is now very much out of vogue, but you still see websites built on it. That is a non-responsive 960 pixel-based way of building systems. Unsemantic, a lot of the 960 team have gone into unsemantic as a way of creating a responsive grid system. Bootstrap is the other one that people have heard a lot about. Bootstrap was created by Twitter, and it is freely available. Bootstrap is I like it, but I prefer Foundation, which is what we're going to start with, because Foundation is actually a very modular framework. And actually, with Foundation, you can take control quite quickly to start making Foundation websites not look like they are built from the building blocks of the Bootstrap framework. So if we wanted to get hold of Foundation, we'd go out and we'd obtain this from Zerb. So I'm going to again share out my desktop now. I'm going to stay on my desktop for the majority of the rest of this presentation. I'll come back to questions and sum things up so I can show you how this all fits together. So Foundation is a San Francisco tech startup company. They've got some very big clients in terms of what they are doing for their website development. And their tools Foundation are freely available. When you download it, you've got a few options in terms of how the page is going to be built. You can either build down and take everything, including the kitchen sink at the moment, which is certainly what we're going to look at to begin with. You can build up a much more customized version of the framework. Like jQuery and other developer frameworks, you don't want to build or take everything in when you go to release. You need to think about all the different parts that will build up the framework type for you. Now again, in terms of the documentation and what all the different parts are, Foundation is very well documented in terms of what we can actually see and do. Foundation explains to us all the different tools we can build with. So I'm going to talk about the grid very shortly, and explains CSS, the syntax, the approach for building and using the code base. I'll talk about this a little bit more towards the end of the session as well, but this is built off a CSS pre-processing language called Sass. Sass and Less are the two most common frameworks that you will see out there for this type of approach. I like Sass a lot. It looks very much like a variable and parameterized CSS framework when we work with it. You can have functions, reusable code, and it's a very customizable framework as a result of that. Now, once we download and obtain Sass as a framework, Foundation as a framework, a few important things actually come down in the way that it works. The first of them is the Foundation CSS file. This is their CSS framework. This is the basis of their grid. This version of the framework, as you can see, it is not small. This is the kitchen sink version. This has over 6,000 lines of CSS in there in terms of how it works. You also get the minimized version as well, which is a lot smaller in terms of the size, and normalized.css. Normalized.css is something you should investigate whether you're building responsive or not. What it does as a file is it tries to normalize the odd behaviors across different browsers. So the CSS that we build is much more likely to be stable, even with the legacy versions of Internet Explorer and what we're actually going to do. So that gives us a basis of how we build up the framework. There's other components that are part of this, which we'll talk about a little bit later on, which include the JavaScript tools for building up and working with the responsive grid structure. So I'm going to introduce the idea of the grid next in terms of how this all fits together. So let me again come out of sharing my desktop for a moment and focus on the grid inside Zerb Foundation. There is no grid when you're building with grid systems. It's a metaphorical idea. And the way that Foundation works is it builds each large content area into a concept called a row. Those rows are broken down into columns, and you would have a block type container like a div, an article, a nav, taking up a certain number of columns within that row, allowing you then to place other elements efficiently spaced next to each element inside that row. You can change these parameters if you want to back on the custom building site in terms of what Foundation is doing. But 12 columns is how they are working. A lot of panel, the templates that you can use to help you build these resources are out there to do this as well. So we'll normally keep it on 12. And then you use this to break down the page. You can have multiple rows. Each row allows you to break down the content space, and each amount of content space allows you to equally quickly build out this structure. The Foundation grid structure is built on media queries, which I'll demonstrate shortly. those media queries allow us, without any major rework ourselves, to determine how the page is going to flow and reflow when we hit the different column breaks. So on a small level of website, the information will become a stacking single column structure. But actually, when we're on a more of a desktop environment, we can space out if we would want to for a desktop type. With Foundation 5, which is just recently released, they've introduced a new medium-sized grid for optimizing layout on tablet-sized devices as well. So I'm going to demonstrate the markup for this in a moment. But what we're going to have is we're going to have our class, the row. And we normally use a div to do this. A div is usually the most appropriate tag for doing this because it's a purely stylistic container. The div defines a row. And within that, we then start building up columns of information. Based upon the media query you're in, that row will have a maximum width. Okay? The row will take up 100% of the available width that it actually has. Max width allows us to constrain the outermost growth of the element. We then divide the information into columns. You have large, small, and with Foundation 5, we also have medium as well. And it's a very straightforward structure. So I was going to use large 8. That's about 3/4 of the grid. So what large 8 will do will take up about 66% of the available space. On a desktop environment, that would be 66% of 62.5 EM, where the EM is a relative unit based upon the user's display. By the use of the column or columns class as well, what also happens is it makes that information float to the left of its contained row, allowing it to pull other information up into the space provided. So I'm going to come out of, I'm going to share out my desktop again at this point, and we're going to have a look at some applications being built in. So to get this to work, all I've done is I've linked into foundation.css. I've also linked to Modernizer. I'm not particularly using this at the moment, but it's just going to set some fallbacks to make sure my page works in legacy browsers as well. This is a CSS3 selector. All I'm doing here so you can see how my grid is actually going to work in terms of the content that I'm building up. Now, what I've done here is I've got my class of row, and I've wrapped up my metadata for the page. I'm using a HTML5 header, and I want that header to extend across the entirety of the document, so it's taking up 12 columns. I've got another one of the inbuilt utility classes here as well. I'll come back to that one in a moment, actually. Let me just comment that out for a second. And then underneath it, I've got another row. And what I'm doing in this row is I am breaking down the content for the page. So my header takes up the entirety of the available page, but actually the content below, what I want to happen on a large documented page, an article with my main content is going to take up about 3/4 of the actual width, and my navigation, which is sitting to the right-hand side, is going to take up about 1/4 of the available width. So all I've done is I've decorated it with these classes. If I go and have a look at the definitions for these inside the class, you can see there we are. There's my position for the relative and the width that it's actually taking up. If I go and look at the row class, again, this is in the foundation class. It's defining the width and the height and the positioning elements for the block that it's actually within. These aren't necessarily complex CSS rules, but it means very quickly what I'm able to do with just a couple of those classes in the applied CSS is I've been able to start creating a gridded type page. So here I've got my central column, as you can see, it's maxed out at around about 1,000 pixels. If I bring up my development tools to explore that, if I go and look at the computed style, there we go. So we can see there's the grid for the row. Okay, and if I look at the next row down, and I look at the article taking up 8 columns, it's taking up about 75% of the actual space. Again, keeping the space in the proportion in terms of the CSS inside. What it's also done, if I bring up my media query inspector, the responsive inspectors, we have a series of media queries. I haven't built these in, these just come with the framework. So what will happen now is if I refresh the page, you can see I've gone down into a smaller media query. Just to talk a little bit more about media queries. Media queries are very powerful in terms of their CSS authority. pretty much only inline styles and important CSSs trump them in terms of what they're actually doing. So this has taken the columns class and is stretched it across 100% of the width. The large 4, the large 8 don't exist at the moment because I'm not inside the media query that applies them. It wouldn't be until I get further out, if I stretch this page, is that information is available. And again, I come back and have a look at this element. What I should find is that the large 4 class is now coming from a media query which only occurs when I'm above 768 pixels in width. Again, Foundation is built on a responsive web design methodology called mobile first. You think about the stacked column-based approaches that are going to be needed to see on a mobile-based device, and then you start thinking about moving or repositioning the element as you hit a larger page. So the grid is actually quite important and very simple to actually use. There is a simple, sort of a good set of utility classes built in as well. So, for instance, I've got 2 unordered lists here, and all I've done in my unordered list is I said this one is going to use the breadcrumbs class, and this one's going to use the side nav class. Again, breadcrumbs is all built in terms of a utility class ready for us to go. If I save those pages and I refresh myself back here in the desktop, what we should find is you can see it styles my buttons here for my breadcrumb and my side-based navigation very nicely, very simply for me. Again, the silver outline, that's not really there. I've only put that on as a utility to help us in terms of layering out the document. There is a large, a small, and a medium grid. And if you use different grid class for different blocks and different sizes, you can reflow the page. I'll show us that very shortly. Okay, the grid can be nested inside another. So what we can do is you can break one part of that grid, one row, into 8 and 4. And then you can take that 8 and 4 and you can nest again and nest again. So you can create rows inside rows. Now, as a result of doing that, because we're built on percentages and relative container spaces, it's always in a percentage of the containing block. So the space to achieve this resizing becomes relatively straightforward. So in this example, what I've got here is just an extension of what we were talking about in the previous section, or the previous example. I've created 2 rows. Okay, the first row is simply my header. It takes up 100% of that space. The second row breaks down. Oh, sorry, I'm looking at the wrong file. Going back to the correct document. Okay, my second area here creates a row within a 6-column row, allowing me to start breaking it down again. So I've got large 4, large 8. I'll show you this is going to work in a moment. What I'm also going to do here is I'm going to put in small 6. And I'm going to put in small 6 here. Now, the benefit of this is, say, we've got a large, we've got a small grid. Very often when you hit a smaller page, you want to reflow, rethink how the information is actually going to appear on the document. So let me show this working. It's a full desktop environment. So what I've done, if I walk back up the element stack in terms of the data we're building here, is I have the row containing my image and my 2 panels of text. I've broken that row, the outer row, into a column row, and then I've broken this further down into a 4 and an 8 column environment. So you can keep subdividing. If I wanted to, inside that article, I could have another grid dividing down as far as you want to. What I've also done here is I've used a small grid. So what should happen now is I resize my page down a little bit. And we hit the smaller grid. What should happen there is now you can see what I've actually done is it's moved into the smaller grid. The information has gone into its natural flow, so all the elements are now stacking on top of each other. Because I've used the small grid, I've told them I don't want it to stack this information on top of each other. I want it to split it into two equal 50-50% grid positions for my smaller layout of my document. Again, you'll see as I come out, stretch my page a little bit further. Once I hit the breakpoint for the larger grid, it'll go back into the desktop variant of the page. So the grid system is media query based. We can nest it inside each other, and we can use different grids for desktop and for mobile experiences using the large and the small grid structure. By nesting inside, we can start just subdividing the space and creating quite a routine, an effective way of halving, quartering, dropping that space down, and using each individual component and the pattern of those components again and again. Okay. We can even determine that we want the grid to offset. You might not want it to start on the left-hand side. So what you can actually do is use an offset. And the offset simply says, I don't want it to take up 12 columns. I only want to take up 8. I don't want it to start on the left-hand side. I want that gap built in. So using this, we can push and offset information away from the edge of the code. One of the trickier things to actually do when we're working with grids is place images or media type containers and space them equally. There's the advent of things like Flexbox, which is going to be important in the next year or two, is going to make this type of work a lot easier to actually set up. But until browsers get here, what Foundation provides is an alternative gridding structure called the block grid. The block grid allows you to take elements and space them equidistantly from each other. You can have a large and a small version of this grid structure. So again, I'm going to share out my desktop. I'll demonstrate that in a second. So this page is going to get slightly more complicated. We add a few bits and pieces in, but I just want to get us into the idea of how easy it is to start building up much more complicated pages. My document is built up of a row, which determines the header of the document, okay, and a graphic that's fitted in with it. And then I have a block grid that I'm going to use. So all I've done is I've taken an unordered list with the list items inside it, and I've applied the block grid classes to it. That's what you need to use in terms of your HTML structure to do this. I'm using another really useful resource here called Placehold. It's with responsive pages, when you're building them, you've got to get the look and the feel right. Obviously, you're going to have a lot of work in terms of the art to be doing, but it's not like breaking apart an old sort of paint shop graphic and looking at the information attached to it. All this is going to do is it goes out to a website and you give it the proportions of the graphic that you'd like it to emulate, and it serves it as if it was an actual graphic for you. So what I've got here is I've got four graphics, sorry, which are 128 by 128 pixels. I'm going to throw this out into the browser so we can have a look at what it's actually going to do. And on this page here, here's my grid. Okay. Again, if I inspect this information, what's happening is that I've got my large block grid, and it says they're effectively going to be 4 to a row. So it figures out how it's going to space out the 4 elements that make up the row. If I wanted to have more than that, to get an idea of how a more complex page might look, if I had more catalog items, for instance, let's put that in, save the page, refresh it. Because I've told it I want 4 to a row, it's just simply going to place them on the next row for me and space those out, without you having to sit down and work all of this out yourself. I think it's important to understand why the CSS is doing all of this things, but actually this allows us to quickly get at that type of block and build. But again, what you may have noticed here is I've also got my small grid showing as well. Within this small grid framework, what I'm able to do is when I hit that smaller media query structure again, what you should see in a moment is it should resize the number of columns. So here we can actually see that what I've got now is 2 per row. Obviously, we want to keep the size of the graphic. We flow the space a little bit as we hit the smaller media query and decide how it is we want it to look. This is all happening on the client. This is all happening through CSS. There's no JavaScript shenanigans attached to this yet in terms of what it's doing and why it's working. So those different grid frameworks give me the ability to start breaking up and loading up my page quite effectively. I'm going to come back and re-examine that page in a moment because it's actually a relatively complete page, but it only took me about an hour to put together in terms of sitting down and using the prototyping tags. That's one of the reasons I'm such a fan of Foundation and Bootstrap in terms of what they do. I think you usually will, when you come to completion, want to tweak them and do things beyond the available basis of the framework. But the framework gives me the building blocks to actually to get my responsive pages, and the idea of working with responsive mechanics, of building the layout for the page done very, very quickly, and then I can optimize and tweak and tailor as I build up my applications. So Foundation, if I come back and have a look at this as well, Foundation also provides a series of quite powerful JavaScript utilities which extend out of the jQuery framework. Now again, most users will tend to have used jQuery. jQuery is an efficient abstraction for the JavaScript and allows us to quickly and effectively select, modify, and manipulate the DOM with your JavaScript. What Foundation does is it uses a HTML5 concept called the data attribute for most of the way that it actually works. With the data attribute, you can create effectively your own tags, your own attributes in terms of a tag. And those attributes can be selected either via CSS or via JavaScript. You can build up a vocabulary, these namespaces, and you can grab hold of these attributes. So for instance, we could build something like data.qa, or data/QA/validate. Or what Foundation has done is it's done things like data-abide or and these inbuilt meta tags allow us to hook up the behavior for JavaScript behavior. Again, one of the things I will use and demonstrate is the responsive toolset. But one of the things that's come into Foundation 5 is the off-screen navigation components. These mostly work by the idea of attaching, as you can see, metadata components. So there's data-off canvas. You follow the pattern, attach the attributes, use the coded documentation here to start building this. You get into a scenario where we can actually create quite effective and efficient mobile templates by following and allowing the Foundation framework to take the weight for us. Sorry, I don't think my desktop shared out as I was doing that. Let me try that again, folks. What I was showing there was on the Foundation documentation, how to use all of these things like the off-canvas navigation. It's all documented. It's all available to us. And here's an example of it. As I say, you can determine that this is going to be using the data off canvas, and this will take this div with the content that you build inside it. It will help you to build up this quite powerful off-canvas style navigation type. We're going to use this for dealing with responsive images very shortly and solving that particular problem. Before we get to that, let's just sort of explore what I so far got in my page. Okay, now I've created, there's not a huge amount of code going on here, just to make it, again, look a little bit fancier. We'll add in a little CSS gradient background. I'm using a font family for setting up the header of the font. Again, they should all be external minimized files when we get to release, but this is a prototype. I've created a row, and that has got inside there my header. Okay, and then I've got a row which consists of my graphic that I want to show you. And then below that, I've got a row which is the rest of the document. So I've got 9 columns showing the major of my text. I've got a side panel with some navigation in there. I've got my gridded row, and I've got a footer in terms of how this all fits together. And it's all broken down. So it's just a repetition of using this column type structure into the way that we've built the document. Okay? So this took me about 45 minutes to put together. This in terms of using the grid structure that I'm actually working with it. Now, the responsive inspector will allow me to jump down the different media query types, explore what the page is doing, and you can see the way I've built up my page in terms of the flow. I basically said that the aside with these IPA recipes, these links and graphics in them, they are less important, so they get pushed to the bottom of the page as I document down the screen. You can even actually determine with content whether you want it to show up on smaller browsers or not. So I welcome to my tech prototype showing quite nicely there, but it's actually taking up quite a lot of space. My graphics doing well enough and you've come to my web page. Do I need to see that information at all? So I'm actually going to take that header and I'm actually going to add another class, hide. And this is a number of hidden ones in here, but I'm actually going to hide for small pages. You shouldn't do this for large areas of content. It's a quick and dirty way of trying your approach, but actually loading lots of information from the server that the user might not see is not really good practice. What we should be doing is when a user comes across this on a mobile page, if they do need to see it, we should actually load it using an Ajax type JavaScript feed to make this a more effective way of doing things. Look, you can see what's happened now is actually that content isn't now there at the top of my page. If I look at it, it is there, but actually what it's done is it's just hidden itself in terms of the information. Oh, that's the wrong one. Let's come up to this row here. That's the one I'm looking for. The header is here, but actually what it's doing is you can see it's displaying none when this class is applied. So you can use this to take content off the page to maximize your use of real estate. As you can see now, I've hit a desktop type style above, width of a desktop site and above. It's actually showing up with this responsive framework. Now, coming back to the JavaScript, what I want to show you here is I've got this one graphic at the moment, which is an elastic graphic, like my first example with the responsive website page. So this elastic graphic is suitable for a large document. So if I come back here and I come to my development tools and I refresh my page, what should happen here is it's going to track that I've used space large as a graphic here, which is 55 kilobytes. Okay, it's optimized for that. Proportions of that graphic are way larger than is necessary for my mobile device. Chrome Development Tools is showing me here that, look, there's my large graphic. This is one of the most tricky things to actually solve. The responsive web development working group have proposed a new picture element, which you'd expect to see rolling into browsers the next year or two. That's going to make what I'm going to show you here a lot easier to achieve. But actually, giving a 55 kilobyte graphic, a 640 by 960 viewported graphic that I've got here, throwing that down to a mobile is not really good development, because what we're assuming there is that we can just squish it down and no one's going to worry about it. And that's probably not right. We want to optimize the way that we're presenting information. So I'm going to use Foundations tools to help me with this. When you download the full version, you have access to a series of JavaScript tools. And again, what they do is they extend out of jQuery to get the work and get this approach of the resizable graphic or form validation or assistance for callouts for forms or responsive video players. They all use these components. Now, if I have a look at my solution, what I have here is a few bits and pieces that are important to us. We've already talked about the framework, but I've linked in, first of all, jQuery. You can pull this off a content delivery network. There's a cut-down version of jQuery called Zepto, which just has the core in it and none of the legacy browser fallbacks, only about 10 kilobytes in size. But that's the jQuery file you're probably using on your website. These frameworks extend out of Foundation. So we've got the Foundation library, which extends out, and I'm about to use interchange as a way of dealing with my responsive graphic types. Now, what interchange does for me, if I come back up to my picture before I get here, previously I just had one graphic, it's taking 100% of the width of the container, it's stretching, it's a fluid elastic graphic, but I'm using a desktop appropriate graphic for a mobile display. Wasted data for the user. In this scenario, what I've done is two things. I've brought in my JavaScript, jQuery, I've brought in the foundation library, I've told it I want to use the interchange plugin, and I've instantiated the foundation library. Now what that will do is, as jQuery instantiates, normally it will go through looking for appropriate data dash marked up attributes, and it will attach and initialize the JavaScript functions it requires based upon those attributes. So it's a very quick and easy and efficient way of doing this. You don't have to do a lot of JavaScript to get this to work very well for you. And here's why this I'm going to show you is all going to work. We've got data dash interchange at this point. Data dash interchange is the variable, the parameter list that is required for the interchange plugin. And you can do a few things here, but what you'll see is I've got different paths for different graphics that are actually being shown. I put the large one in the width of 100 as my source as a fallback, so if the user didn't have JavaScript enabled, this is still going to gracefully degrade. But if it does have JavaScript enabled, I can progressively enhance instead. I've got here the media queries that are built into the framework, so small, medium, large. I've got a default graphic which will be loaded in to begin with. You can specify your own media query widths and heights there. You can specify image ratios as well in terms of doing this. Again, this is all documented on the foundation site. But I'm going to throw my page out into my browser at this point. Show us what we can do. Now you can already see that I've got a different graphic coming up at the moment. If I just reload my page at this point, what we should see is it's actually grabbed hold of the large graphic, not what we want to do normally, but I've now set on top of it with the small graphic. What should happen now is if I resize my browser so it hits larger criteria, it should be the case. There we go. You can see I've just resized, and the JavaScript now has detected an immediate query changes that occurred. I've hit the larger grid, so the large version of the graphic file comes through. And the reality is on a mobile device, the user's never going to resize their device. They're always going to be on that small graphic. So we load the small first, and then we will actually scale up into the medium and the larger graphics based upon the actual display that the user is seeing. Usually, again, on a desktop device, you're more likely to have more bandwidth available. You're going to want that higher version of the graphic. But we're not taking the very simple fluid graphic approach of squeezing a large graphic into a small page. And there's way more we can do as well with this. Lots and lots of actual frameworks. I'm going to show you sort of a completed page from our responsive website development course here. And one of the things that we want to think about on courses like that is how do we optimize for the user experience. So let's just throw in here to my suitable folder. And some of the things we can actually deal with. So I'm going to show us here the forms page. This is using a JavaScript library called Abide, which is built into the library. It bases off the HTML5 form validation control, so it extends out of those in terms of what it's actually doing. But I've tried to submit this to the server, and it's attached out the JavaScript to this page for me without me again doing a great deal of work. If I came and have a look at this particular individual page, well, I'll notice I've got a series of forms that we're using here, and I specified, for instance, that is a required field. So I haven't put that, that's a HTML5 attribute. I'm overstepping on the HTML5 attribute by using the JavaScript. Again, what I've done is I've just told it to initialize foundations. In this piece of code, it's initializing Abide as the plugin. And I'm setting up a custom pattern so I can do things like look for particular URLs or regular expressions, allowing us to abstract this away and keep it a very, very simple markup structure. So we could just use that as a term up here, which will make sure this is a properly, fully fashioned URL. There is the top-down and drop-down navigation framework built in. This framework here, again, not that complex, but quite a bit of detailed following of the HTML5 pattern for documentation needs to be followed for this. But in this scenario, you can see I've got a typical web scenario, mouse-driven behavior for my navigation, which is absolutely useless on a mobile device because we don't have the hover selector. So what this library does, again, it'll attach JavaScript based upon different behaviors. You'll see as I hit it, look, we can see our old friend, the hamburger, appearing here. So this hamburger module allows me to create a touch-driven interaction point to work through with the pages. Just while I'm at this at the moment, another very useful tool for us within Chrome. Chrome has recently built in a device emulator. So if you bring up the development tools inside Chrome, if you're a Chrome user, the icon here with the arrowhead on it allows you to tell it to emulate a particular device. So I'll ask it to emulate, for instance, the iPhone 5. And you can even do things like engage things like the touch screen sensors, so things like the hover behavior don't work. And I'm going to ask you to emulate the device. I have to do a little reload of my page here to get it reloaded correctly. But you can see now what's actually happening is my page is reflowed and reloaded into the document, and I'm able to explore the idea of the menu structures. Okay. So let's sum up what we've talked about there. Foundation allows us to create rich data functionality. It's got a number of responsive, ready JavaScript functionalities which extend out of jQuery. If you know jQuery, you can use these. The simple tools are quite well documented on the website. There are quite a lot of advanced options you can go into further down to set additional options, additional requirements, like my web pattern URL that I set in my Abide plugin. It's easy to initialize. You have to have a link to jQuery to begin with, then you link to the Foundation library, and then you can instantiate the Foundation type. There are individual plugins then you can use for using things like the forms and things like the Abide and the interchange format that I've used, which are very effective ways of speeding up your pattern to development. Interchange I've shown you, it's a fantastic tool, but actually, just before I come to a conclusion, what I think is really important to note as well is the Zerb product is built really on the concept of the open web. So this is a completely free product that the Zerb have made available for us. They've got all sorts of other things that they do which are not free, but there are lots of great, very good built-in frameworks and tools and widgets which are available on the Foundation website. This includes sorts of inbuilt components, page design, templates, icon structures, case studies using the website. One of the ones that I've got here just to show you is this example here of the blog template they've used. I grabbed this off the Zerb website this morning. I put it quickly together. I attached a little bit of back color to it to start thinking about my color panels and my switches as I'm putting the page together. The template and the pages that are available on the Pattern Tap website are really effective. This one here, again, straight off the website, using the same frameworks we're talking about. We've got the grid, we've got the idea of a catalog page, so you can use this as a template to start thinking about what you're doing very quickly, and understanding how other people have gone about solving the responsive view problems for their individual pages and templates. That's an introduction to what we can do with responsive website design. And there is a lot more to responsive website design. The grid, the framework, foundation open the door to us. And they open the door in a much more effective way than trying to do all of this from scratch. Because the CSS, the JavaScript, the modules, even the individual SAS files for much more advanced programmatic manipulation of the way you construct your files is freely available for you. And that means you can start building from a tried and grid structure rather than trying to do everything from scratch. But it's not quite as simple as I've just shown you. I've shown you some great whiz bangs. Within an hour, we put together some responsive pages. But beyond that, what we also need to think about is how would we optimize different images for different devices and connection speeds. So I've used one approach there, but if you haven't started looking at it, think about how SVG might fit into the way that you build pages. SVG is a fraction of the bandwidth of a PNG or a GIF or a JPEG, and to resize it, it's vector-based, so it goes almost anywhere. Navigational patterns switch between mobile and desktop. I've just shown you the offside navigation, and I've shown you the hamburger button tap effect, which is used on quite a lot of on websites, but the hover type effect approach won't work. There's minimum heights and styles and approaches that buttons should actually be able to use. And even if you're building for desktop, don't forget that a lot of devices are now becoming touch enabled. I'm on a Windows 8 machine right now, and very often I actually hit my touch screen with my finger to actually launch something rather than moving my mouse around and tap at it. So the breaches between desktop and tablet behavior are moving very, very closely together as a concept. When we move and resize fonts, how do we keep those proportional? Do we need to provide Retina versions of graphics? There are pros and cons to this advice, this approach. And Retina graphics are very, very high pixel density. That data has to be transmitted, which has a cost for us and a cost for our end users. Now, if you want to know more, we've got a very exciting announcement to make. Zerb are visiting London in May, and we will be doing a free day training event with Zerb at London International House. This is going to be limited to 40 people, and you as the attendees to this event will be our first invitees. So we all have your email addresses for registering in. You will expect in the next day or two a link to the Zerb event. This is a bring your own device session, just a note. So you will need to bring a laptop along or share with someone else there in terms of what's going to be doing. But we're very excited to have Zerb over to give us the breakdown of what they're going to be doing with their package, and you can expect an invite to this very soon. It's on a first-come, first-served basis, but please only accept if you can attend. I've already got 40 places and 104 attendees today, and more besides who would like to come along. So if you can come and you would like to, you get the first chance to come along because you've come to this session today. We're very excited to be working with Zerb, and I think it's going to be a great afternoon on Tuesday the 20th of May. Okay? If you want to learn more about what we've talked about on these courses, here's a list of courses which are relevant to you. If you're new to HTML5, we have a web applications of HTML5. We have a responsive website course, which takes what I've just done here in a potted hour, expands it out into in-depth over 5 days. We've got a new single web page applications course loading, which will use AngularJS and Node. And we have 2 courses on user experience design, fundamental, and some designing for devices. And designing for devices talks a lot about different patterns for things like different mobile platforms and different UX patterns in terms of how we reach it. What we've also launched very recently is our Masters program. Some of these concepts and much more besides fits into our new Masters in Emerging Technologies. So if these are in your training plan for the next year or two, you may want to consider our Masters program, and we have a link there to that URL on our document as well. Okay. I'm going to open up the floor to any questions in a moment. I'll leave this on the screen. If you've got technical questions about this, please feel free to email me. If you have any questions about the slides and other bits and pieces, you can contact that on Tech Week as well. You probably are a member of the Tech Week group already on LinkedIn. That QR code there will get you to me on LinkedIn as well. Or you can actually just search for David Walker at QA and you'll find me. I've already put my demo files for this session up onto my LinkedIn profile and up onto the Tech Week profile as well. So you'll be able to download the code and have a play with those after the course as well. Okay, so I'm going to open up the floor to any questions there. I can see one from Johnny Parker at this point as well. So Yep. Cool. So let's have a look at the questions we've got coming in. So Johnny was the first person to ask me a question, Johnny Parker. Any guidelines for choosing responsive HTML over native app development? My feeling on that, Johnny, is it depends on what you're trying to achieve with the app. The benefits for going native is that you have access to censored device capabilities and the performance of running natively on a device, which HTML5, CSS3, JavaScript are good at, but they're not as fast as writing native embedded compiled code. So if you're going for a more performant, complex app, then actually it might be better to go native. If you're not, then you can usually find that creating an HTML5 workflow where you can build a responsive website and maybe extend or do different functionalities in a tool like PhoneGap means you can take out a lot of the concepts, sort of the potential duplication of work of having to have an iOS, a Java, and a .NET team. There are frameworks that you can get. There's one for .NET that I know about where you can actually write in .NET and compile out into different languages as well. You want to minimize that effect. If you've got any further questions, Johnny, please feel free to drop me an email and we can happily go into further communication about this, or follow me on LinkedIn and we can open it up there in the Tech Week group. Harold Grieve asked, are there any responsive plugins for Firefox you would recommend? I would need to take a look, Harold, at that point, because I tend to use Chrome because so much of it is just there in the browser. But do again feel free to email me and I can follow that one up for you in terms of how it works. And Linda says that she's a .NET, Linda Jones is a .NET MVC back-end person. Observe of this concept called being a T-shaped developer, which I agree with very much. If you're going to have very optimized AJAX calls, data loading, performance, I think one thing that's really important, whether a front-end or a back-end developer actually, you need to be more involved in the entire life cycle because responsive applications live and die on performance on both ends of that. So hopefully looking at foundation and getting yourselves a little bit, hands a bit dirty with this if you are more of a back-end person, will make you more aware of the challenges and the limitations, and using developer tools in the browser can help us do that a lot. So what do we, okay, we've got other questions we've got here. What are my views on the use of SAS? Asked Alex Smith. I think SAS is absolutely amazing, and actually it's a firm-suited march of the developer into the front end of website development. SAS is a functionalizing of CSS, if anyone's not come across it. It allows you to create variables, temp parameters, reusable function blocks of code. Anyone's worked with XSLT templates, it reminds me a lot of the concepts there. And I'm a big fan of using SAS because actually when you come to building web pages, you're often reusing a lot of the same sort of concepts, and by actually using the SAS template structure, you can reuse it across multiple programs. Michael Wolfdale asked about getting Foundation to work with IE7 and IE8. One of the problems with IE7 and IE8 is, again, depends on the media queries and some of the other technologies you're actually using. I would generally actually say that you may, for 7 and 8, not want to you may not want to try and achieve everything. You can polyfill. You have polyfill to jump back into older solutions and older ways of doing things, but the effort to do this becomes really complicated. And it can actually slow down other pages in terms of you can actually target other user problems then because you're actually slowing down the load on a more modern device. Some studios we've worked with recently have now actually got specifically outsourced and have got separate style sheets for legacy pages where they can keep the look and feel. They don't try to build in the media query type approach. There are a number of different scenarios to that, but again, if you want to talk further about it, do feel free to drop me an email. Paul Douglas asks, how do I target a mobile phone with 1098, 1024 pixel ratio? We're talking about viewport there rather than pixel ratio, which is slightly different. The pixel ratio, where people often think about as retina displays, are a pixel's not a pixel. When you think about this, a retina display, in terms of the pixel proportions that Paul is talking about, there are two ways of doing that, Paul. If you're doing it in raw CSS, you can actually put in the ratio. I can't remember the parameter name off the top of my head on here. You can put in device ratio parameter for images, and that would only load those image parts based upon a particular device's capabilities. So you can set things like the image to then a URL pattern. The problem with that is that you're now going to be effectively pulling that via your CSS. What the plugin I just showed you for Foundation allows us to do is it allows you to create pixel density queries. So you can actually put an image tag and you could ask it, if it is on a device with a particular pixel density, to pull down that graphic instead. I prefer that because that's actually happening as part of the image tag. The URL one has got accessibility implications, and it has problems if a user wants to print out your graphic, for instance, is a way of doing that. So I would actually have a look at interchanging Foundation or similar patterns for doing this. You don't want to use Foundation. There's a technique in SVG called the clown car pattern. You search on Smashing Magazine for it, you'll find it. And that is a great way of actually solving the multiple image problem using JavaScript and SVG to load the appropriate graphic. Do I recommend a viewport? Alex Smith asked, do I recommend a viewport that takes into account the virtual keyboard when you are creating web forms? Yes, Alex, I do. And you've got to do some UX testing based upon that, really. What I think is very important is when you're expecting information from the user, reduce the amount of information that you're going to take onto the screen at a particular point. You can do things like hiding away your labels and have things like placeholder controls in the text inputs instead, which make it easier for the user to see what's actually going on. For things like drop-down option boxes, don't have lots and lots of options inside there. You've obviously got the little scroll wheel that you see on iPhones and Android devices. You get a very flat, non-skeuomorphic list on Windows 8 phone devices, and there are different patterns for that. Again, if you want to email me, Alex, I can recommend a good book on different patterns for you for this in terms of where you can look at this. But I do think it is very important that when a viewport is cut in half by the idea of a phone or keyboard coming out, that we are keeping the user centered in terms of what they're doing, and so they're not disappearing off the screen. Any other questions from anyone at this point? Okay. Well, we're coming up towards 2:30 there, folks. So I think I'm going to have to call an end to the session there. Oh, I've got another couple of questions up here. Yeah. But so we're cool. Paul's come back with another question there, but it's coming up to 2:30. So if anyone is going on to any further sessions, do feel free to drop off at this point. I'm just going to finish off these last two questions, and then we're going to conclude for 2:30. So I hope everyone's had a useful hour and a half with me. I'm sorry we lost a little bit of connectivity there for a few minutes, but if you've got any queries or questions, just drop me a direct email. So coming in from two different chat windows at this point, and I'll happily follow those up with you off channel as well. Okay? So at that point, gang, I'm going to call it, and do feel free to drop me an email, and I'll happily answer any technical questions off channel at this point. Okay? Thank you very much.